A decade. What is a decade? A decade is a really long time period, 10 years to be exact. And the NBA has had a lot of decades and a lot of great players to come from those decades. Those decades include the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s, and much recently, the 2020s. But each era has its respective best player from that decade. Now, in this video, we will be talking about the best players from those decades. Now, each era has its own style and grace about it. Like the 80s had the Showtime Lakers and the Bad Boy Pistons. And the 60s had the super teams with Bill Russell. Wilt Chamberlain had those crazy stats, and Oscar Robertson averaging a triple double. In the 70s, yeah. But today, what if we just forget about all those great teams and the great players and just pick out one best player? And that's exactly what we'll be doing today. So sit back, relax, grab some popcorn, grab whatever you need to grab, because it's going to be a good one. Now go ahead and subscribe and leave a comment down below if you feel like I missed anyone, and if you feel like someone should have been on here who wasn't on here for the start. But yeah, without further ado, let's go. Now, the 60s was definitely the hardest decade that I had to pick one player from. And honestly, it came down to only 3 players: Oscar Robertson, Wilt Chamberlain, and Bill Russell. Now, obviously, I have to choose one. And like I said, this is the hardest one, but I will have to say the GOAT of the 60s is Bill Russell. And here's my explanation. Now, I know I don't like bringing up rings when I'm evaluating a player or how great he is, but I mean, 11 rings in any era is crazy and unheard of. And he has 5 MVPs to Wilt Chamberlain's 4. Bill Russell has outshined Wilt Chamberlain in a couple playoff series if you go back and look at it. And it's not even like Bill Russell was a bad scorer in his era. I mean, he averaged 15 points per game over his career, and his highest average was 18 points per game. But Bill Russell wasn't really looking to score the ball. If he wanted to score the ball, he would have a lot less rings than he does now. But I mean, that's not something you should count against him. So for the 60s, I gotta go with Bill Russell. Kareem, I mean, this one was definitely a no-brainer. I mean, come on now. 28 points per game for his rookie year, then follows it up with a 31-point season. I mean, Kareem was honestly a myth in this era. I mean, he played in every All-Star game that there was in the 70s but one year, but he only played 60 games in that season. So, I mean, what hasn't he done that hasn't already been said? 6 MVPs, most of those coming throughout the 70s. I mean, the dude's just a beast. I'm gonna make this one short and sweet. Kareem's the GOAT for the 70s. Now, the 80s was definitely one of the tougher eras that I had to pick one player from. But at the end of the day, it came down to two players that even deserve to even be called the best from that era, and those two players are Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. Now, these two have eerily similar numbers, eerily similar stats, accolades, and everything. But in this one, I would definitely have to give the nod to Magic Johnson. Now, here's my explanation. Now, since they have similar numbers and accolades and stuff, even though Magic does have 5 championships, 2 more than Larry Bird's 3, they both have the same amount of MVPs, both have 3. Magic has more All-Star games, All-Star game MVPs, and I mean, overall, the impact of the 80s was definitely felt more through Magic Johnson. Now, don't get me wrong, this was definitely a close one, but I definitely have to give it to Magic Johnson. Now, Larry Bird does have a strong argument. I mean, Larry Bird was, flat out the better scorer. Averaged more points than Magic did for his career. But honestly, I would definitely have to give it to Magic Johnson due to his accolades and his impact on the era. I mean, come on now. Could it have been anyone else? Michael Jordan is your 90s GOAT. I'm gonna just keep this one sweet, short, and simple. Michael Jordan was just completely dominant in this era. He was a myth. Arguably the greatest player of all time, and definitely the greatest player of the 90s. No one even comes close or compares. I mean, from winning to crazy stats to all-time accolades. I mean, what doesn't he have in this era? So definitely got to give the 90s to Michael Jordan, another no-brainer. Now, the 2000s. Now, this one might be my most controversial one yet, but ultimately it comes down to two players, and those two players are Kobe Bryant and Tim Duncan. Now, I don't really think this one is close, but I'm going with Tim Duncan, the big fundamental, and here's why. He has 3 Finals MVPs to Kobe Bryant's 2. He has 2 MVPs to Kobe Bryant's 1. They both have 5 NBA championships, and Tim Duncan has a Rookie of the Year. Now, stats honestly vary due to position. I mean, Kobe Bryant was never really efficient, but Tim Duncan, in the grand scheme of things, really was probably arguably a top 5 most efficient player of all time. But you do have to put into account the shots that he's taking, and most of them coming inside of the paint. But I mean, the stats really just show for themselves. Tim Duncan was never really a guy to try to get his own bucket. He could, but I mean, he would obviously sacrifice his own stats for his team success. Something that Kobe Bryant had to pick up later in his career, and Tim Duncan just knew that right away. So, I mean, honestly, the 2000s is just his era, bro. Honestly, and this one is not even close, like I already said. But yeah, you guys can be the judges of that. But I think it's the big fundamental, Tim Duncan. Now, the 2010s, I mean, honestly, this is just another no-brainer. The best player to come out of the 2010s, it's King James. I mean, there's not really any surprise. Who else would be here? I mean, 4-time MVP, 2 in the 2010s. I mean, 4-time champion. He's just, I mean, one of the greatest players of all time. Averages 26, 7, and 7 for his career. Did most of his damage in his 2010s. In his best season to come from the 2010s was his 2013 season. I mean, no one else really even comes close. And there's been a lot of other great players to come from this era, like players like Stephen Curry, Kevin Durant, Dirk Nowitzki, a lot of great players to come from this decade, but none of them even come close to LeBron James. So that is the best player from the 2010s. So that'll do it for today's video. If you guys feel like I left any errors or any players out, please make sure to comment down below, leave a like to help the channel out. And yeah, all I got to say left now, peace.